So I got a couple cool little packages in the mail. One of them you can't see actually. I'm holding it in my hand. It is a GoPro handle. So I've been using, when I bought this GoPro to start the channel, I was using this to hold on to the base of this. I mean, kind of like this. So this was my makeshift GoPro handle here, but I finally bought one and actually got a normal GoPro handle now, so that's nice. But I've got another package in the mail here. Let's take a look at it and see what it is. Awesome. So we got our shifter plate for our G4 shifter. So that's awesome. Now we can start the install video on putting this shifter plate on the G4 shifter and getting it mounted in the car. So that'll be cool. Let's get to that. Anyway, so we got the car all washed, and I actually got my shifter plate and stuff for the Civic. I'm actually going to, I've got it bolted on, and I've actually got to take it back off to do a couple things. I'm actually going to make some, you can tell, well, you might be able to tell. If you look, you can see the shifter actually has a little bit of gap there between this part of the shifter and this upper plate. So I'm going to try and make it to where I can, and even there too you can really tell. But basically I want to make this to where this will go all the way and hit each end of that plate, so I know that I have enough throw in the shifter. So I've got to take the shifter apart, and if you can tell, so like when this one's all the way forward here, it actually looks like it's kind of hitting there, but I don't think it really is. It's actually hitting this piece here. So I gotta take this piece back off, which I gotta take the plate off to do so. I'm gonna take this piece off and take it, and probably, I was gonna put it in the lathe at work, but I'll probably just take it to the belt sander. It doesn't have to be true or anything, so it's not like it does anything other than just, it's part of the shift linkage. But I'll probably take it to the belt sander and machine some of that off. And then inside here, there's actually a bolt on the mechanism that it actually hits on itself inside the shifter as well. So I got to take that out and notch that to make up the clearance for basically like your 1-2 or your 3-4 shift to get a little bit more throw out of it. So I am going to get this shifter apart, go get some bolts and stuff so I can mount it all back together when, you know, basically I get it all clearanced and everything to go in the car. So we will continue this whenever I get back from getting some bolts, and we'll get this apart, and I'll show you what I'm doing to make some more room for some more throw in the shifter. So I got the shifter apart, and you can see basically there's this little bit of gap here, and I'm going to try and make this where it'll go all the way back just like this one goes all the way forward. So that's why I'm going to take this off and grind this down here. But I also notice, if you look, this bolt here is hanging out and it's just like a set bolt to hold that shaft in that little mechanism there. So I think what I'm going to do is, I think I'm actually going to pull that bolt out, maybe replace it with a shorter one, maybe this one too. They are ARP hardware, which is kind of funny, but I don't like the way that hangs out of there, so I'm going to mess with that and see if I can figure out why that's doing that, but just in case it's hitting on something inside the shifter. Basically what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take this edge right here, I'm going to put it on the belt sander here, try and thin that out a little bit, give me a little bit more throw on that shaft, you know, where that shaft goes into it and it throws itself. This is hitting the body of the shifter, so I want to try and get a little bit more movement out of it, so I know that I'm getting all the throw out of it, as far as the shifter can throw it anyways. Because, you know, they got the stops on the shifter, but the shifter mechanism inside the transmission itself will only go so far, the way they're designed, so I don't think it's going to be an issue as far as the shifter moving too far for the transmission. So let's belt sander this up. Alright, so I got that machine down a little bit. We'll put it back together and see, make sure we get enough throw. I'd like there to be a little bit of gap between this and the edge of the body there whenever it goes all the way through. So let's see what we got. Alright guys, I got it all back together, and you can actually see, maybe, see how you can see it touches all the way to the front, all the way to the back. So now I should have all the throw that this shifter will allow, and basically whatever is inside the transmission that stops it from going any further, whether it be like a detent or the fork or something like that. Those detents will keep the shifter, obviously more than likely it probably won't go all the way to this side or all the way to that side, but at least now we know if there's an issue, the shifter won't stop it and cause, you know, tranny problems of breaking dogs off the dog box transmission or anything like that. So that should do it. So I gotta go get some more bolts for this and then get my joints ordered, and then we can start putting this in the car. Alright guys, so we got our bolts. They're actually a little longer than they need to be. We went and got those and some washers. Now these more or less, I believe, kind of just stabilize, you know, the way this bolt, because it bolts down on top too, and they're countersunk. But I think this just kind of adds some rigidity to this whole structure here. But so we're gonna get these bolts put on, and shifter should be ready to basically go in the car, aside from the linkage, making the linkage mount up to it, and then actually cutting the hole in the floor so the shifter can come up through it. So we should be about ready to start that that mock-up. So we got our joints from Speedway, and there's a good possibility I'll have to do some fabricating here, more so than I'm already doing. But this end of this joint here that you actually use, or the end of the shifter here that you actually use, that is going to be too big. This is 3/4 ID, and this must be like 1/2 inch OD. So I'm going to have to make a shim to slide in there to make that fit somehow or another, or I'm going to have to get a different joint. I'm not sure yet. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I might have overthought that originally. But anyways, got the joints. The 3/4 inch chromoly tubing should be here fairly soon, and a piece from T1 that'll go in here that'll weld on, and then we'll slip onto the part of the transmission where the shift selector shaft comes out of, and then it'll slide in and it'll have a hole for the dowel pin and all that stuff, so it bolts on like factory does there at the transmission side. So alright, so here is the stock shifter. I actually replaced everything on inside of it, so it's like pretty solid for a stock shifter. I've kind of waited it out as long as I could, but it was just time to make the change to the G-force shifter. Try and get to a point where we can put a strain gauge on it and do some no lift shifting and stuff like that. But that's the finishing lines. Like I said, I've got everything finishing lines on the car. That is their stage and brake plate, and it's actually set up. It'll bolt to the existing G-force shifter plate as well. I'll just have to drill a couple more holes up in front of it, but all this will clear the G-force shifter, and then it's able to use pretty much any stage and brake that you want to put on it. This plate will pretty much take all of them. So let's get this all off. I'll mark this hole, and then we can start getting it cut out and pull the old shifter and stuff out of it so we can start mocking up the G-force shifter. Alright, so we got the stage and brake unbolted from the shifter plate, and basically these are your two factory holes. The bolts come up through them, and they're actually threaded in the floor. So we put nuts on the back side to hold the back part of the plate down, because there's nothing to hold it to this since the floor is threaded. So you run them all the way up through it. They come up above this, and then you tighten this up, and this tightens up the back part of the plate. And then the same thing. These are all pre-existing holes that are already in the stock floor. So anybody wanting to put a stage and brake plate, that's the one to get. But we'll get this plate off and get the shifter out from underneath the car. And like I said, I can mark this hole here, and that will give me an idea of where I need to cut the floor out for the G-force shifter to come up through it. Alright, so we got the car up on the lift, and we are going to let's get under here. Okay, so I lied actually. These holes here are not pre-existing Honda holes. Those we had to add, but we'll actually have to add 2 more to it as well, just north of those ones. But these are actually the pre-existing ones for the rear isolator mount. And basically got to unbolt this, pull the pin out of it, drop all this out from underneath of it, and then we can focus on cutting this hole out where it needs to be cut for the G-force shifter to bolt to the floor. And then once that's done, I get the joint and stuff for here, then I can measure the distance and actually mount my linkage. So let's get that pulled out, and we'll start cutting. Alright, so we got the pin out that everybody hates. You gotta usually slide the shifter all the way forward. It'll push that shaft all the way in and make it to where this will slide out a lot easier. Then you can wiggle it like that and pull it off. Now it's all the way in. That gives you a little bit more room to throw this back, because if it was all the way out, you wouldn't be able to get it all the way off. So we'll get this one off, drop all that out. Alright, boys and girls, we've got our spot marked for pulling this, or well, we've got our spot marked for cutting this out. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably, just as much as I hate to do this, start cutting my floor up. That's fun. So we got this piece all cut. I'm gonna take this out, and I'm gonna like deburr the edges of it and stuff, and just clean up all the sharp edges, make sure I don't get cut on it or anything like that. And then I'll probably put a little paint on it to keep it from rusting. Hopefully I got it in the right spot. We'll see. So I think I've got it pretty well cleaned up, all the sharp edges and stuff. Like I said, I'm gonna hit it with a little black paint around the edge here, try and keep some of that from rusting out on me. And I'll get it from the bottom side with some undercoat as well. But let's get it back up in the air and see if we can put this back on there. So, we got it kind of halfway bolted up in the car. I actually got to snug a couple of these up, like these back ones. And I can bolt these front ones down. And then I've got to open up these. I drilled the holes from the bottom for these front 2 bolts in the bracket of the that T1 shifter plate. But I've actually got to go through and open those up a little bit. I don't really want to take the shifter back out of it just to get to those 2 bolts. So I'm going to hope that I can get these started, and then just take a step drill bit, open those up so I don't have to pull it back out, and not mess up the threads in it. Otherwise I'll have to put a bolt with a nut on the bottom of it, which wouldn't be, you know, a big deal either way. That one doesn't seem like it wants to line up very well. This really sucks trying to look at these holes while I'm on the lift here. There's that one. That one. And then last one is right here. So now that we've got the shifter installed, all we'll have to do now is work on making the actual linkage itself. I bought some, they make a kit for it, but I can't ever just buy something that's meant to be done a certain way. I always, which doing it my way actually saved me a couple $100, but plates in, shifters in, so now I can actually put my stage and brake back on, bolt that back up there, and if I wanted to I could go ahead and put the center console and stuff back in it. But yeah, shifter's installed, now we just gotta do the linkage. Alright guys, so we got the shifter itself installed. I got the hole and everything cut in the floor and all that, and I'm super weird about trying to keep the car. I don't know why. I mean, it's a race car, but I always try and keep the interior in the car. I like the way it feels. I don't know, just tightens, to me, it makes the car feel tighter inside. You know, it's not all janky and rattly and all that stuff. But I mean, granted, the car doesn't have a back seat or nothing like that in it. But as far as everything else, I mean, it still has the rear paneling, the rear speaker deck, all that stuff in it. Carpet and everything. But anyway, so I got a couple little things that I still have left to do on the center console and stuff, but I'm actually going to put the center console, shifter boot, and all that stuff back in it. And I really like the way that it looks. Some people don't, but I'd really like your guys' opinions on it, see what you think. You know, if I should gut it and make it as bare bones as possible, or if you like the full interior. But I really like the way the you know, it just ties the interior together. And you know, like I said, this is meant to be, you know, a street car class more or less. But like I said, I just like the way it makes the car feel when you're sitting in it racing it. Granted, it's still, you know, it's a race car, but I just like that street car feel. You know, and if the car had turn signals and all that stuff on it still, I mean, you could potentially still drive this car on the street. But anyways, we'll get it up in the air and we'll start fabbing up the shift linkage itself underneath the car. What's up, guys? So we got the car up in the air. I don't have all my pieces yet, but I should have them all in the next day or so. But basically, I've got to connect this to here, And that little piece there's got some adjustment and stuff in it, I assume for different applications and stuff, but it's not gonna need much adjustment on this one. It's actually a pretty, once you put a joint here, it's a pretty good straight, you know, shot to that shift selector shaft there. What I've got here is my joints are 3/4 ID. See, so this is 3/4 of an inch here, and I measured this. This is actually 5/8 of an inch. So I was actually going to make something that, you know, like a shim or something for this, and I kind of decided against it. And I was talking to my buddy Josh over at Finishing Lines, and we had him send me a picture of his shift linkage. And what I'm actually going to do is the 3/4 inch chromoly rod that I bought that fits inside these. Actually, the ID is very similar to 5/8. So I cut this little piece here. It'll sit flush up against that, and then I can just go through and then buzz a weld around that, and then my joint will slide on, and then I'll buzz a weld around this too, and it'll just kind of be its own little extension piece here. And then the shaft will weld into this, and then I'll have another joint here with the piece I bought from T1 that'll have the hole for the dowel pin and stuff in it. But yeah, I went ahead and cut this little piece here for this. I'll set that up, kind of center this adjustment here up and make sure the joint's kind of in a spot where you won't get into like a weird binding situation or anything, which it doesn't move that much. I'll go ahead and maybe weld this up, and then once my little piece comes in, then I can set it up and try and get the length of the shaft cut, and we can start welding that up and finish it up that shift linkage. So I almost made a mistake here, but in doing this, I needed to make sure that the shifter will say like this is all the way 4th gear here. You know, you throw the shifter back, it'll actually shove this rod forward, and turn will shove that into all the way into the transmission to 4th gear, and then I'll measure basically from here to the other joint here, and that will be the length of my shaft I'll need to cut and then weld onto it. I'm actually impatient as hell, so I basically am just giving myself another like extra inch because the joint's really long. So the joint and that extension piece is probably going to be somewhere around here. So I'm actually just going to basically cut it as long as end to end where it would be without the joint. And then when that other piece comes in, I'll get it welded to my second joint, and then I can shorten up that shaft. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it, shorten it up, and I've got it here in my little bandsaw here, and I'm going to get this cut. Alright, so we got that cut. I am going to get my little sander out here, belt sander, and I'm going to deburr the edge of this and this end too, where they go into the joints, which granted this one's going to get cut a little bit more. It'll probably end up getting cut to about here, and maybe actually even a little shorter than that, but I'll just go ahead and deburr it just for good measure. Alright, so we got that deburred. Let's actually crawl up here and make sure my length is relatively close. Like I said, granted, I'm going to tack all that up. But this will kind of give you an idea about kind of what it's going to look like. But yeah, I'll go through and I'll buzz all this on here, and then my other joint and that other piece will sit up here. Alright, we're going to weld this on here. I actually already tacked it in one spot, so now I'm going to continue around the other direction. too. I think that actually got the joint a little warm. But, ow, it's hot. Shit, don't grab a hold of that. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but I got a little bit of it welded together. Got that joint and the tube welded. All I have to do is cut that down, add the other joint to it. And then this one here, I just butted that up against that piece. I actually had to grind a little bit out of there so the bolts would set flat. Otherwise they were going to want to rest on the weld. I tried to make the weld as small as I could, but it didn't matter. But yeah, once I grounded that out, you can see maybe how that kind of sits down in there. It sits flat now where I notched that weld. But we got, like I said, we got that all welded together. Now we can wait on this other piece to come in from T1, and we'll get it all welded up, buttoned up, and then that shifter install will be done. Actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. I might have jinxed that, knock on wood. Alright, so our piece came in for our shift linkage on the Civic. Let me show it to you here real quick. This is the piece here. So this is the piece that's going to slide over the selector shaft that comes out of the transmission itself, and then obviously your hole for your dowel pin. And then it's going to get welded into this like that, and then this end will go on the shaft up to the shifter. What we're going to do is I'm going to pull that back out because I've kind of got it mocked up in there right now. I might actually take a couple little measurements and kind of see where I'm at as far as how much length I need to cut off the shaft. And I'll go ahead and start getting this welded up, and then once I figure out the length here, I'll get it tacked together. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up to where the transmission's in neutral and the shifter itself's in neutral. That way I know, you know, if say I try and cut the linkage and it's in 4th gear, we'll say, since it's centered up, we're going to say that's 4th gear. If for some reason the transmission doesn't want to throw all the way, I don't want to have not enough movement forward versus not enough movement backwards. So I'm going to set it up to where the shifter is pretty much dead center, and then I'll know that it'll go backwards and forwards far enough based on what the transmission itself wants to move inside. Alright, so I basically centered this up. This is center here, and I measured basically from here to here on the case, and then from there to there on the case, and it actually has just about 3/4 of an inch, a little over 3/4 of an inch of travel. And the shifter here has almost 1 inch of travel. So if I set this up in the center of its full travel, I should have more than enough both directions, forward and backwards on the trans side, and the shift linkage or the shifter itself shouldn't bottom out at any point going backwards or forward, so there will still be a little bit more throw left in the shifter itself. But as long as I set this up in the center of its travel and then measure my length, kind of the same deal with this, I'll have to set this up in neutral like that, and then basically measure from this point on the joint back, and that should be my length. I'll get this marked, get this put in the bandsaw, cut it, and tack it up, and then we'll bolt it all in and make sure we can go in all the gears and make sure I have plenty of throw every direction. Alright, so I got it all tacked up. I got this tacked up, and I basically set all my distance here, set the transmission in neutral. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up in the car and try and run it through the gears and make sure it engages all the way. And if it all seems good, then I'll pull it back out, and I'll go ahead and finish welding this and this, and I mean I can bolt it back together and it should be good to go. God damn it. Woo! Scared me. Scared me. That son of a biscuit. Got me. Alright, so we got all this welded together. All my lengths and stuff seem to be pretty spot on. So now all we got to do is put it up in the car, put the pin in it, put a couple bolts in it here. We'll Loctite those down. We got the linkage all up in it. Got everything adjusted. There's actually, like, on this back part, this is a flanged piece here. It's actually slotted so you can adjust either the linkage or the shifter and where you want it to sit in relation with, like, a gear, first or second or whatever. If you want it all the way over, you know, you've got a little bit of adjustment and where the shifter wants to sit. But got the pin in it. There's actually a little clip that goes on there. I normally, you know, try and put them back on there. I don't imagine this is going to fall out, but I got to grab that and throw that back on there. But I think what we'll do is we'll lower it down and maybe start it up and try to run it through the gears. Alright, so we got the shift linkage and all that stuff all fabbed up. Everything's back in the car. I even went through and went ahead and put all the center console and stuff back in it. I'm kind of weird, like I said, about the interior and stuff being kind of a full interior street car, so to speak. But I mean, I put the shift boot and everything back in it, as you can tell. But that's just kind of how I like things to look. So anyways, that's pretty much going to do it. Oh yeah, I forgot. I pulled all the stickers off, aside from a few small ones that were probably covering up rock chips and whatnot. Didn't want to pull them off and then pull the paint off any further. But yeah, so I mean, the car's coming together. I gotta finish putting the headlights back in. A couple little plastic tabs broke where it bolts down to. So I want to make some brackets for those, try and stiffen those up a little bit. And then obviously we got the MRE badge all tacked on, and I mean, everything's in it and ready to go. But other than that, I mean, the car's pretty well done. Gonna hopefully wait for spring to come around and get some funds together, and then I can try and either get the tuner here or fly out to the tuner or take the car out to the tuner or whatever the case may be. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, Aquaria Racing, and we'll keep getting at it.